Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling something really fascinating, software security.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is, and it's based on well, let's be honest, it's based on a pretty hefty stack of lectures and notes that you sent over.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. And our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to help you, our listener, not only ace that upcoming exam you mentioned, but also really get why this stuff is so important, especially in our digital world.
Absolutely, it's crucial.
Yeah, and I have to say, as I was going through all the material you sent, there were some real eye-openers in there.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for one thing, did you know that most security breaches, they're not about, some hacker in a hoodie like in the movies.
Right.
They often start with, like, a tiny software flaw, a little coding error.
Yeah, it's often the simplest things that can trip you up.
Exactly. It's like leaving a window unlocked. Anyone with the right know-how can just slip right in.
That's a great analogy. And the scariest part is these flaws are everywhere, even in software we use every day.
Speaking of, do you remember that Spring 4 shell vulnerability from last year?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It really showed how even super common software can have these hidden weaknesses.
Absolutely. It was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
So how do we stay ahead of these ever-evolving threats? How do we even try?
Well, that's where the security development lifecycle, or SDL, comes in.
SDL. Okay, so what is that exactly?
It's about building security into every step of creating software.
Okay, I think I get it, but how's that different from the regular software development lifecycle, the SDLC? I mean, don't they both want to make software that works?
They do, but the focus is different. Think of building a house.
Okay, I'm full.
The SDLC makes sure the foundation is strong, the walls are up, the roof doesn't leak, the basics.
Right.
But SDL comes in and says, hold on, what about strong locks, security cameras, maybe even a moat?
Oh, I like that, the moat. So it's about thinking ahead, like anticipating those potential threats before they even happen.
Exactly, and building those defenses right from the start.
Got it. And I noticed in the material you sent, there's also a lot of focus on what happens after the software's released, not just building it, but maintaining it.
Right, that's a key difference. SDL doesn't stop at launch. It's about dealing with security incidents, responding if a vulnerability is found, adapting to new threats.
So it's kind of like having a dedicated security team for your software, even after it's out in the world.
Precisely. Always on guard.
Okay, I can see why that's so important these days. But even with the best defenses, some threats might still get through, right?
Absolutely. And that's where threat modeling comes in.
Threat modeling. Okay, now we're getting into the spy stuff.
A little bit, yeah. It's about anticipating those unexpected attacks.
And I saw two models mentioned in your notes, Stride and Dread. What are those about?
They're frameworks to help us understand and, categorize potential threats. So Stride, think of it like a checklist with 6 categories.
Okay, 6 categories.
Spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. You have to think about all the ways someone could try to compromise your software.
So you're brainstorming all the potential weak spots, before they become real problems.
Exactly. And once you've identified those threats, Dread helps you rank them.
Rank them.
Yeah, you look at how much damage a threat could cause, how easy it is to exploit, how many users it affects.
Oh, so you're saying, okay, these are scary, but this one's really scary, so focus on that first.
That's a great way to put it. But even after all this planning, we still need to actually test our software to find those vulnerabilities. That's where our testing tools come in.
Testing tools, what kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, one example is fuzzing. Think of it like sending in a swarm of digital bees to poke and prod your software, looking for any weak spots.
Oh, so you're deliberately trying to break things to see where the vulnerabilities are.
Exactly. It's a kind of stress test for security.
I like that. And then there's static testing. What's that all about?
That's like carefully reviewing a blueprint before you start building. You analyze the code for potential flaws before it's even compiled into a program.
Oh, so you're catching those vulnerabilities right in the design phase. Clever.
It helps catch errors early on before they become major headaches. Then you've got dynamic testing. That takes things a step further.
Dynamic testing, so how's that different?
Imagine you built that house. Now you're simulating a real-world storm, seeing if the roof leaks, if the windows hold up, if the foundation stays strong. You're looking at how the software behaves in, real-world conditions.
So static testing checks the design. Dynamic testing checks the performance.
You got
That makes sense. And then there's penetration testing. Is that where those ethical hackers come in?
Yep. There's skilled security professionals who try to break into your system, but with your permission, of course.
So like a friendly sparring match.
Exactly. They use all their tricks to find vulnerabilities so you can patch those holes before someone with bad intentions finds them.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got our threat modeling, we've got our testing arsenal, but what about those classic coding errors, like SQL injection, buffer overflow? Are those still a thing?
Oh, they're definitely still a concern.
They are.
Yeah. Let's take SQL injection, for example. Imagine a simple website login form.
Okay, you enter your username, your password.
Right. But what if someone slips in some malicious code along with their username?
Oh.
With a poorly designed database, that code could get executed, giving them access to sensitive information.
Oh, wow. So they could, like, unlock any door in the house with a skeleton key?
Pretty much. Scary stuff.
It is. It is. How do developers protect against that?
One of the most important things is to validate all user inputs.
Validate?
Don't just trust the data, check it carefully before processing it. It's like having a bouncer at a club.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
You got to make sure everyone has the right ID before letting them in.
That makes sense. Okay, so SQL injection, that's sneaking in bad code. What about buffer overflow? How does that work?
Think of a glass of water,
Okay.
and you keep pouring more and more water in. Eventually, it overflows, makes a mess, right?
Yay.
That's kind of what happens in a buffer overflow attack. You send more data than a memory buffer can handle, causing it to overflow and potentially corrupting surrounding data.
Oh, I see. So it's like a data overload situation.
Precisely. Too much information crammed into a space that can't handle it.
And just like with SQL injection, careful input validation is key here too.
Absolutely. You set limits on how much data you're accepting to prevent that overflow.
It's all about those safeguards.
Yep. Building them right into the code.
This is really eye-opening. It's like a constant game of, cat and mouse trying to stay ahead of the attackers.
It is. And speaking of sneaky attacks, have you ever heard of OS command injection?
OS command injection, no. What's that?
It's a way for attackers to sneak commands into your system that actually get executed at the operating system level.
Wait, so they're hijacking, like, the entire system? How does that work?
It often exploits flaws in how software handles user input. Imagine a web app that lets you upload files.
Okay, yeah.
If it's not checking file names carefully, an attacker could embed commands within the file name itself.
So they're, like, hiding a secret message inside something harmless.
Exactly. And when the application tries to process that file, it unknowingly executes those commands, giving the attacker control.
So again, input validation is a crucial defense.
Absolutely. You need to filter out those potentially harmful characters, those sneaky commands, from user inputs.
So it's like having a metal detector at an airport. You're checking for anything dangerous before it can cause any trouble.
That's a good one.
Okay, so we've covered SQL injection, buffer overflow, OS command injection. What else? Are there any other common vulnerabilities we should know about?
Well, there's cross-site scripting, or XSS. It targets websites and can turn trusted sites into traps.
Okay, now that sounds scary. How does that work?
Imagine injecting malicious scripts into a website. Scripts that then get executed in the user's browser.
Oh, no!
Yeah, it's like turning the website itself into a Trojan horse.
So the website becomes the weapon.
In a way, yes. And that malicious script could steal cookies, redirect users to bad websites, even hijack their accounts.
That's awful. How do developers protect against that?
One way is to carefully sanitize all user inputs.
Sanitize?
Yeah, especially those that will be displayed on the website, like comments, forum posts, things like that.
Right.
By encoding them correctly, you prevent malicious scripts from running. And there's another important defense, content security policies, or CSP.
Content security policies.
It's like setting ground rules for the browser, telling it what sources are allowed to load scripts and other content.
So even if a bad script sneaks in, CSP helps limit the damage.
Exactly. It helps create a more secure environment.
Well, this is all really fascinating and a little bit scary, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. I mean, it's incredible how much work goes into keeping software secure.
It's definitely a complex field. But understanding these fundamentals, that's crucial.
Especially with how much we rely on software these days.
Exactly, and it's only going to become more important as technology evolves.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, and I know you, our listener, are eager to hear more about how all this applies to your studies.
And I'm ready to dive into some more specifics.
Perfect. So let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into the world of software security.
Welcome back to our deep dive into software security.
Going through all this, it's striking me that secure software, it's not just about protecting data anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, it's about protecting lives too, right? Think about medical devices, self-driving cars.
Oh, absolutely.
They rely so heavily on code. A single vulnerability, that could be catastrophic.
You're right. The stakes are definitely higher than ever. That's why having a strong SDL is so important. It's about making security part of the software's DNA, from the very beginning.
From design to, what was it, post-release support?
Exactly. And speaking of SDL, I remember the material mentioned that post-release phase. That's a key difference between SDL and a regular SDLC.
It is.
Yeah. Both have similar steps, like planning, assessments. But SDL, it goes further. It focuses on what happens after the software is out there.
After it's released.
Right. So you're managing the unexpected. Think about it. Once software is released, it's out in the wild, facing all sorts of potential threats. So SDL, it makes sure there's a plan to handle security incidents, respond to scrutiny, provide updates, all that.
So it's like having a rapid response team always ready to jump into action.
Exactly. Being proactive, not reactive. And a big part of that is knowing how to handle those security incidents effectively.
That makes sense. But what does that actually look like? What should a company do if, something happens?
Well, first off, transparency is key. If there's a vulnerability, you got to be open with customers, with the public.
So no more sweeping things under the rug.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Honesty and openness, that's how you maintain trust.
Right.
Along with clear communication, you also need to provide updates, offer those remedial services.
Like if personal data was leaked, offer credit monitoring.
Exactly. Those practical steps, they can make a big difference.
They can. But I imagine there's also a lot of internal analysis after an incident.
Absolutely. You need a thorough impact assessment. Figure out the root cause, how much damage was done, how to prevent it from happening again.
So it's like a post-mortem, but for your software security.
Precisely. Learning from mistakes, strengthening those defenses, and a crucial part of this is having a business continuity plan.
A business continuity plan, what is that exactly?
It's about making sure that even if an attack happens, you can still function, with minimal disruption.
So like having a backup generator, it keeps things running even if the power goes out.
That's a great analogy. So SDL, it's proactive, prepared, transparent. But it also emphasizes early integration of security right from the start.
Right, I remember that from the material. Integrate early, integrate often.
Exactly. The earlier you start thinking about security, the better. Weaving it into the fabric of the software.
Because trying to add it later, that's like what? Trying to put a square peg in a round hole?
It can be, yeah. Incredibly costly, incredibly complex. Can you give me an example, like a real-world scenario?
Sure. Let's say you're building a database for a hospital.
Okay, sensitive patient data.
Exactly. So privacy, that has to be top priority from the get-go. You'd need to think about data encryption, access controls, audit trails, all that stuff.
Right, making sure only authorized people can see and change the data.
And I'm guessing this applies to other sensitive data too, like financial records.
Absolutely. Think about a payroll system. You need safeguards against, embezzlement or unauthorized payments built in from the start.
So you're not just building software, you're anticipating potential threats, building in those defenses before they even become a problem.
Precisely. And another crucial aspect of this early integration is regulatory compliance.
Right. The material mentioned that quite a bit.
It's essential. Depending on what you're building, you might need to follow industry standards, government regulations.
Makes sense.
For example, if you're dealing with financial transactions, you'll need to comply with the PCI DSS.
PCI DSS, right? The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard.
That's the one. Failing to comply, well, that can lead to fines, legal issues, damage to your reputation.
So there's a legal aspect to software security, too.
Absolutely. It's not something to take lightly.
Definitely not. It seems like there's so much to consider when it comes to, building secure software. Is there anything else that often gets overlooked?
Well, one challenge is short-sightedness in the design phase.
Short-sightedness.
Yeah. Sometimes developers, they get so focused on making the software work that they don't see the security risks.
So they have tunnel vision, they miss the bigger picture?
In a way, yes.
Oh.
And this can be made worse by, that tendency to look for information that confirms what we already believe.
Oh, confirmation bias.
Exactly. So if a developer thinks their code is secure, they might not look as hard for vulnerabilities.
That's a good point. But it seems like public scrutiny, that's a big motivator for developers to take security seriously, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Nobody wants to be the next headline about a data breach.
You're right. Public scrutiny, it's become a powerful force for change. Breaches are publicized, often with huge consequences for the companies involved.
So it's not just about protecting data, it's about protecting your reputation too.
Exactly. And this pressure, it's forced developers to be more proactive, more transparent about their security practices. It's not something you can hide anymore.
Right. So transparency, early integration, and a healthy dose of public pressure, that seems to be the recipe for building secure software.
It's a good start. Speaking of which, remember we talked about static and dynamic testing earlier?
Yeah, I do. Can you remind us what the differences are?
Sure. Static testing, it's like reviewing a blueprint before you build a house.
Right, checking for flaws in the design.
Exactly. You're analyzing the code itself, looking for errors, logic flaws, vulnerabilities.
So you catch those problems early on, before they're baked into the code.
That's the idea. It's like having a super careful inspector checking your work before you even start building. And there are tools that can help automate this, save developers a lot of time.
That makes sense. No, dynamic testing, that's different, right?
It is. Dynamic testing, that's where you actually build the house and test it out.
You put it through its paces.
Exactly. You run the compiled code, see how it behaves in a simulated environment. It's like putting your software through a stress test.
So static testing checks the design, dynamic testing checks the performance.
You got it. And just like with static testing, there are tools that can automate this too, like simulating user interactions, different system loads.
So both approaches are valuable, they just focus on different aspects.
Exactly. And together, they give you a more complete picture of the software's security and how well it works. And remember those threat modeling techniques, STRIDE and DREAD.
Yeah.
Those could be really helpful in guiding both static and dynamic testing.
Oh, I see. Because if you know what the potential threats are, you can focus your testing on those areas.
Exactly. You can prioritize the most critical vulnerabilities.
This is all really fascinating stuff. It seems like testing is a huge part of building secure software.
It is, but it's not the whole story. There are other techniques as well. Have you ever heard of fuzzing?
Fuzzing. Tell me more.
It's a testing technique where you basically throw random or unexpected inputs at the software to see what happens.
So you're trying to break it, but in a controlled way.
Exactly. It's a great way to find those hidden vulnerabilities that might have been missed by other methods. And the best part is you can automate it. There are tools that can generate all sorts of crazy inputs, from simple data variations to complex attack scenarios.
It sounds like fuzzing could be a really valuable addition to any security testing strategy.
It is. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another crucial aspect of software security: penetration testing.
Penetration testing. I think we touched on that briefly earlier, but I'm eager to learn more.
Okay, well, penetration testing, or pen testing for short, it's like a real-world simulation of a cyber attack. You bring in ethical hackers, and they try to break into your system.
So it's like a controlled experiment, but with real attackers.
Sort of. It's all done with your permission, of course. The goal is to identify any weaknesses in your defenses that real attackers could exploit.
So you're finding and fixing vulnerabilities before the bad guys can get to them.
Exactly. Penetration testing can uncover things that might be missed by automated tools or even manual code reviews. These ethical hackers, they think like attackers. They use all sorts of tricks to try and penetrate your defenses.
It sounds like a really valuable exercise, like having a team of expert burglars case your house and point out all the weak spots.
That's a great analogy. It helps you see your security from the attacker's perspective.
That makes sense. So we've talked about a lot of different testing techniques, but with all these tools and methods available, why do we still see so many security breaches happening?
That's a great question, and there are a few reasons. One is that the landscape of cyber threats is constantly changing. Attackers are always coming up with new ways to exploit vulnerabilities. It's a never-ending arms race.
So it's like you fix one problem and another one pops up.
Kinda, yeah. But it's not just that the attackers are getting smarter. Sometimes it comes down to human error. Developers make mistakes. Organizations might not have the right security processes in place.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the processes too.
Absolutely. Security is everyone's responsibility. You need a culture of awareness, vigilance, and constant improvement.
Which brings us back to SDL.
Right, the security development lifecycle.
Yeah.
It's all about embedding security into every stage of the process.
It's not just a one-time thing, it's an ongoing effort.
Exactly. By thinking about security from the beginning, you can avoid costly mistakes and build a more resilient system. It's about baking security into the DNA of the software.
This has been a really insightful discussion. I feel like I've learned so much about the complexities of software security.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is a field that's always evolving. What we've talked about today might be outdated in a few years or even months.
That's a good point. So how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we keep learning?
Never stop being curious. Explore the latest research, read up on security best practices, and most importantly, try to think like an attacker. The more you understand the threats, the better prepared you'll be to defend against them.
That's great advice. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion so far, but I think it's time for a short break. Welcome back. As we wrap up this deep dive into software security, I wanted to touch on something we've been discussing throughout this whole thing.
Oh, what's that?
Testing tools.
Ah, yes.
We talked about fuzzers and static analyzers and penetration testing.
Right.
But I think it would be helpful to really dive in a little deeper.
Deeper. Okay.
To understand what each of these tools does and why they're so crucial for building secure software.
Sounds good. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with fuzzers.
Fuzzers. Okay.
Remember that analogy we used earlier about sending a swarm of digital bees to find holes in your software?
Oh, yeah. I like that one.
That's exactly what fuzzing does. It throws random data or even malformed data at your software just to see how it reacts.
Right. It's all about finding those unexpected vulnerabilities, the ones that might slip through the cracks.
Yeah, exactly. Like the kind that might not be caught by those more traditional testing methods.
Exactly. Fuzzing is great at uncovering those edge cases, those weird combinations of inputs that can make things go haywire.
And the best part is you can automate it.
Oh, absolutely.
You can test a huge range of inputs without, having to do it manually.
It saves so much time and effort. Plus, you can test much more thoroughly.
It's like giving your software a really intense stress test.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so fuzzers are all about breaking things.
In a controlled way, of course.
In a controlled way, of course. Now, what about static analyzers? What's their role?
Static analyzers are like having an incredibly meticulous code reviewer.
Oh.
Someone who goes through every single line of code looking for potential problems.
So like a second pair of eyes, but with a hyper-focus on security.
Precisely. They examine the code without actually running it.
Ah, I see.
They look for patterns, anything that might signal a vulnerability.
So they can catch things like coding errors, insecure practices, maybe even backdoors that got in there by accident.
Exactly. They're like having a security expert built right into your development environment.
That's amazing. It seems like these static analyzers can save developers a lot of headaches down the line.
They can. Now, how about we talk about penetration testing?
Penetration testing. I know it involves those ethical hackers,
Right.
but what do they actually do and why is it so important?
Well, penetration testing is basically a simulation of a real attack.
Oh, wow.
You bring in these skilled security pros, and they try to break into your system.
Wait, so you're saying you let them actually attack your software?
Yes, but with your permission, of course. And it's all done in a controlled environment.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel better.
The point is to find any weak spots in your defenses, things that real attackers could exploit.
So it's kind of like a friendly sparring match.
You could say that. The goal is to identify and fix vulnerabilities before a malicious actor finds them.
It seems like penetration testing would be a really good way to test your defenses in a real-world scenario.
It is. Penetration testers, they use all sorts of techniques to try and get in. They think like attackers.
They can help you see your security from a completely different angle.
Exactly. It's about finding those blind spots, the things you might have missed.
Okay, so we've got all these amazing tools and techniques, but why do we still see so many security breaches happening? It seems like with all this knowledge, we should be able to prevent them.
Well, it's a good question.
That's a tough one, too.
It is. And there isn't just one simple answer. For one, the world of cyber threats, it's always changing.
It's evolving.
Exactly. Attackers are always finding new ways to exploit weaknesses, new vulnerabilities to target.
So it's like a constant arms race.
You could say that. But it's not just that the attackers are getting more sophisticated. Sometimes it comes down to human error, plain and simple.
Ah, the human factor.
Exactly. Developers, they might make mistakes.
They're human.
They are. Or sometimes organizations don't have the right security processes in place.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about the people and the processes too.
Absolutely. Security, it's everyone's responsibility. It takes a culture of awareness, of vigilance, and of always striving to improve.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it all ties back to what we've been talking about this whole time, the security development life cycle.
SDL, the one constant in all of this.
Right, STL. Remember, it's about building security into every stage of development.
From the very beginning.
Exactly. It's a mindset, a way of approaching software development with security as a top priority.
It's about making those security considerations a core part of the process.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so effective. By thinking about security from the outset, you avoid costly mistakes and build a more robust system from the ground up.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. It's amazing to see how much effort and thought goes into building software that's both functional and secure.
It's been my pleasure to delve into this topic with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for sending us all this material and giving us the opportunity to explore it. We hope this deep dive helps you ace that exam, but more importantly, we hope it inspires you to think differently about software security. Because in today's world, it's not just about protecting data, it's about protecting people, their privacy, their livelihoods. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay secure.